So, hello, my name is Ben Leiden. I am a senior consultant at MZN International. We are a consultancy that work with NGOs, work with nonprofits to help them do their work better. Also with me today is my colleague, Ewan Henworth. I don't know if you want to say hi, Ewan.
Hello, everyone. As Ben says, my name is Ewan. I'm an analyst at MZM, and I will just be here to moderate the chat and to pass Q&As along to Ben. If I could just ask everyone to use the Q&A function to put any questions in, but feel free to use the chat if you have any comments on questions or any sort of follow-ups or discussion you'd like to have amongst yourselves. And we can also address that in the seminar. You'll also have to excuse me, I'm suffering a bit with a sore throat at the moment, so my voice is perhaps not as clear as it could be.
Thank you, Ewan, and I hope you feel better soon. So today we are talking about how to get donor mapping right. So if that's not the topic you're expecting, you might be in the wrong webinar, but you know, you're still welcome. So to start today, I'm going to put into the chat some phrases, and I would like you to write the end of the phrase, but don't press enter just yet. I want to give everyone a chance to write something, and then in a minute, I will ask you to press send. So the first one is, right now, I am feeling. So please write how you're feeling now, but don't press send when I say. Okay, press send. Oh. Oh, thank you. It's great to see. Curious, powerful, eager, good, and lucky to be here. I feel very lucky to be with you too. The next phrase is, I am based in. And write and then wait a moment, and I'll tell you when to send. Okay, share. Everybody share. Oh, Palestine. Welcome, everybody. Oh, wow, nice mix. Across Europe, Beirut, Zambia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Next one is, my job is. It's going to get more topic focused in a moment. So everyone, please share. I don't know. I'm quite curious about this. I don't know. Hi, Yad. Hi. Great. Oh, also lots of people related to grants, expected this program staff. That's great too. Welcome. Now, if you weren't here, where would you be? Or what would you do? I'll give you a little bit longer for this one, I think. Okay, and share. Oh, swimming. Oh, in a lovely holiday destination with beach and hills. In a meeting with a colleague planning to write a proposal. Oh, that's quite a good place to be, I suppose. Brushing your teeth at 8 a.m. So you must be the other side of the Atlantic, I guess. digging inside a carrot. Oh, great. I think I would, I'm not sure what I would be. I might be outside. It's quite nice weather here today. A bit chilly. Getting autumnal. So next one. I am here today to there's just two more of these and then I'll get started with the presentation. So please share. Learn about donor mapping. That's good. Learn more. Good. Hope it's legal to learn. Get inspired. Oh wow. Not too high expectations on me then. Nice. There's two more of these. The next one is a challenge I face when it comes to donor mapping is. And please share. Oh, lack of experience. Well, it's a good place to be here. How broad to be and who to include. Knowing how to approach new donors. Lack of adequate information. Getting to the nitty-gritty issues. Access to straightforward platforms of donor information. Limited information. How to get contact details. That is a. Oh, good. Well, I hope today we'll be able to give you some insights or some ideas of how to work on those challenges. And now here's the last one for open presentation is for me or for you, the most important thing in donor mapping is so please share. It's a big list and quickly goes stale with changing donor priorities. Targeting the right donors, tailoring the map, categorizing donors based on needs and wants, seeing results, having the right information in a timely manner, knowing their interests. Nice, really nice mix of what, but also a lot of alignment of what's the most important things around interest and looking at their needs, wants, desires, their concerns, their fears, fitting donor priorities into what we have on offer. Finding donors to match your organization. Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you for your openness. I'm now going to share the presentation, and I hope you. Sorry, I want to present it. I'm not finding the right. So hopefully there you should be able to see my screen. Ewan, could you maybe just indicate that you can see my screen?
Yeah, I think everyone should be able to see your screen.
Oh, okay.
But
thank you. So today we are
yes, so
good. Thank you, everybody. So we're talking about donor mapping and how to get it right. There's me. Yeah, you can see me live, or you have a photo of me. And there's some of our colleagues. So what are we going to look on today? Well, first we're going to talk about the why. Like, why do we map donors? It's really important to understand the purpose of what we're doing when we're doing something like donor mapping, or really almost anything. What's the purpose? It's at the heart of any exercise, really. Then we're going to look at how to set up a good donor mapping. And here we'll look more specifically at setting parameters and where to put data or where to store data. Then we'll go more into the nitty-gritty of donor mapping, for donor research, prioritization, and action planning, where there'll also be a little bonus. And at the end, we have Q&A. At the same time, so I will answer questions at the end. any questions that come up or even comments that come up, please just pop them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we'll see. Depending on what it is and how it is, that I'll see if I can maybe answer them directly or flag as to when in the presentation I will cover that, or at the end. So first, looking at why map donors. Well, really, you map donors and you prioritize donors in order to help you find funding, and time is money. So you want to prioritize your search. You prioritize where you're putting resources in donor engagement. And a good donor mapping helps you to find and select opportunities and donors that fit to you, and more particularly fit to your future situation, because you're not looking for funding, but you're looking for funding for now, but you're looking for funding for future action. So the good donor mapping helps you to do that. It helps you to take decisions on where to invest time, money, and resources. And it helps you to think about next steps and to choose next steps. Now, the images. So basically, I'll explain. I know the image is covering up some of the wording, but I will talk through. Strategy and purpose is really at the heart of a useful donor mapping. Because I mean, if you have a list of 20 donors, but no idea of what you're going to use them for, then what was the purpose of that? So therefore, before you start doing donor research, it's good, or I think it's fundamental, to be clear on what you want funding for and by when, and to be clear how the donor mapping will be used by who, because you can use donor mapping for different purposes and different people could use donor mapping. So here, I'm going to pause a second for reflections and get some input from you. And actually, I have to stop sharing the screen because I can't get to mine. And I want to ask you two things. First is, so possible users of a donor mapping include, who do you think? Like, take a moment. Don't share yet. I will tell you when to share. Now you can put as many ideas come to your mind. Doesn't matter how crazy it is or how, you know. We've just received a question about whether you will receive the slides. Yes, you will receive the slides. Sorry, I should have said that at the start. You will receive the slides after the webinar. I'm not sure when after the webinar, but you will receive the webinar.
We have a question in the chat, Ben, asking if we could explain what donor mapping actually is.
Yeah, I will in just a moment. Just think about just finish this about the possible users first. So please, could everyone share who they see as possible users of a donor mapping? Finance department, program managers, fundraisers, organizations, donors, project designers, fundraising colleagues, senior management team. Oh, thank you. Okay, and actually, I'm going to throw this back to the group. The next one. Senior management and fundraising team, donor mapping. So, you tell me, what is donor mapping? So, have a think, write a response, but don't press send just yet. Hold on, hold that. Takes up to the record, could you donor mapping? Thank you, Hamza. So, share. What do you think donor mapping is? What for you is donor mapping? A database. Identification of potential funders with flashcards, identifying. Process of identifying the right donor. Database. Yeah, I think that's a really, I think the responses you've got there, Hamda, really outline to you what donor mapping is. So essentially, when people refer to donor mapping, they mean either a list of donors, literally a list of donors for a particular, let's say, a particular who focus on a particular geographical location or a particular theme. Others, when they say a donor mapping, they would mean more a database where you have a categorization of donors, including information about them, like what areas they're looking at, how they relate to an organization's strategy, how they relate to an organization's programs, may also include actions of how to engage with the donor, many things. We can also talk about some vocabulary that people may use in donor mapping. So the suspects. Suspects are donors who you've just identified, but you don't know if they're actually at all relevant yet, like maybe that you just know of them. Then you've got prospects. Those are ones which are more relevant. And you've already identified, so they're not a suspect anymore, they're a prospect. And then there's also other terms that some people use, these colors and things like this for prioritization. But I hope, Hamza, just maybe could you give an indication in the chat if that answers your question? Not getting a response. So, Hamza, you can let us know. How does donor mapping differ from donor prospecting? Well, I think that's a matter of the definition. I'm not sure, because donor mapping and donor prospecting too is not, they're not set standards. So, we reflected a bit on possible uses. Who could possibly use a donor mapping? The users of donor mapping. Now, I want you to think about what might they use it for? So, users might use donor mapping in order to do what? So again, take a moment, reflect, write something down, and then share. So please share your thoughts. Sorry. To identify available resources, diversify funding, increase funding base, and strategically solicit for funding, planning for programs and operation costs, identify new areas to work in, identify prospective funder, expand and improve their responses with more and better targeted funding. Understand strategic donor priorities. To exclude donors. Inform themselves of the next funding opportunities. Thank you for sharing. So I will show here now on the next slide, you'll see some ideas I had in terms of possible uses and possible purposes. And I'm being clear that these are, non-exhaustive. As you've seen, there are many different people who could use donor mapping, and there's many different purposes. Now, why am I talking about this and saying this? Is because it's important to think about this before you start donor mapping, so that the donor mapping is useful, because if you're looking at better understanding the donor market, then you will do your research in a different way than if you're considering funding options for a new program, or if you're looking at streamlining your funding pipeline. And you may include different information if you are using the donor mapping, if board members are going to use donor mapping, or if project staff are going to use the donor mapping, or if fundraisers are going to do donor mapping. So think about users and purposes before getting a start actually on the donor mapping. So how do we set up a good donor mapping? So you've got your donors, you know who the users are, and you know the purpose of it. And you know what you're looking for funding for. So you have like a funding strategy, and you may have targets. You may know by when you want funding. You may have policies that we can take funding from this donor, that donor, whatever. So essentially, there's 4 steps to take to set yourself up and to actually get on with mapping donors. Is to understand the parameters. So you need to understand, specifically your parameters, because donors will have a range of criteria and eligibility standards, and your organization will have specific capabilities and it has its mission to fulfill. So it's not, I don't know, for example, like a lot of EU funding is only available to organizations registered in the EU or registered in the recipient countries. So for example, if you are a US organization, then the chances are a lot of EU funding is simply, you can't reach it. You cannot access it. So I just see the question about the sharing the presentation. We will share this after the webinar. I'm not exactly sure when it will be shared after, but it will be shared afterwards. Like our colleague who handles that, she's on holiday this week, but I think early next week she would then share it. The video will also be put online. So it's not worth spending time looking at donors or looking for funding which is then ineligible. So it's important to understand what criteria are acceptable for you at the start. Then you need to build a place to put the data. So essentially, you need a table. Now, this could be a database. You could use Excel sheets. You could use Google Sheets. We would suggest to have something which is easily accessible and interactive. So essentially, ideally cloud-based or on a platform. Also, it should be simple. Like we'll go a bit later in the presentation into some examples. Then you will research the donors. And here it is important to think strategically and be aware that proper research is essential to avoid disappointment. You don't want to spend a lot of time looking to donors and realize, actually, we're not eligible because we don't have this registration or we're not, whatever. So it does take time. And then the final step is, once you've got information on the donors, is then to be clear on summarizing what you have and prioritizing opportunities that you've found. It's not like a list of 20 donors in itself is not likely to really help you get further. But if you then consider, okay, which ones are the best ones for us, that will help you. And we'll talk about prioritization a bit later. Essentially, you want to make sure that it's your mission and what you want to do that drives the donor mapping. Funding just for the sake of funding doesn't make you strong as an NGO. So donor mapping does have a purpose in terms of like market research, like understanding what's out there. However, doing it solely for the purpose of market research, I would say, is that it can be dangerous, because you want to make sure it's the mission that's driving the donor mapping. So, some questions here which could help you set the parameters. You're looking at funding targets. How is that target maybe split? Unrestricted, restricted. So unrestricted means fundings which you are able to use however you want. So the classic example of that is individual donor donations, which have not been, there's no restrictions on them from the donor. Or restricted, so grant funds for the most part are restricted. They're only for a certain project, for a certain amount of time. What do you need funding for? What activities? What areas are you working in which are new or innovative or might attract funding? What are the no-go areas of your funding policies? Like, I don't know, for example, you work in a child rights organization, so I imagine then the policies may say you can't take from organizations which have allegations of use of child labor, for example. What types of donors are you looking for? So are you looking more at foundations? Are you looking more at government? Are you looking at, I don't know, in a particular geographical area? And then which geographical areas are you seeking funding for? You know, are you looking for activities in France or in Asia, Australia? That can help to set the parameter. Now we're looking at where to put the data. So as I said just a moment ago, essentially you want to have something which is as fit for purpose as possible. So keep it simple and accessible. From my experience, Google Sheet can be a very powerful tool, but you need to also fit with your system. So platforms and places where you can link to other documents can also be useful. Keep in mind that it should be living document. It will need to be revisited regularly and actively managed. That prioritization should be indicated. So keep in mind like which ones are active calls, as well as looking at ones where you want to be more strategic and look in the longer term. It's good practice that if you have a particular opportunity, it's very clear who's responsible for handling that opportunity. So if you've got like a call for proposals, okay, who's actually making sure that we're working on that? Or you've got a particular donor that you want to engage with, okay, who's the owner of that engagement process? Who is making sure we're going to keep doing that? And keep in mind that like donor mapping and prospect table. So when I say prospect table, I mean literally the information or where you store the information from a donor mapping. It is as much about long-term networking as it is about an immediate opportunity. You may find information in donor mapping which is not relevant right now or not really useful right now, but it could be useful in the long term. So I'll show you now some examples we have. So here's a sample of a prospect sheet or a prospect table. So you have like name of the donor, the link, a website, a deadline, if it's applicable, what's the status of it, what next steps are we taking, what description of focus areas, and a contact email. Now here you can see there's no prioritization here. This is a very basic one. I mean, and then we've got here's two others. These are quite small. I mean, when you receive the presentation, you'll be able to see them better. These are done on another software. It's not on Google Sheets. I can't remember the name of the software. It's not one that I'm familiar with. But you can see they don't only have one sheet, they actually have several sheets. So grant applications, funders, contacts, partnerships, and then username and password. And you can see they're storing information such as the name of the donor, contacts, where are we in terms of the prospect, what's the deadline, next steps, description, links, and including things like funding amount, country intervention, these sorts of things. You know, at the bottom you can see this is more So the top one is more organized around funder, and the bottom one is around applications made. And so here you can include information like funding status, type of application, next steps. Again, I would say that what information, like how the columns you use in tables, or what information you store, and what information you look for and you store, depends on what you're using the donor mapping for and who's using it. So going into actual donor research itself, how do we do donor research? Well, essentially, there's three main tools. First, you look around at your existing donors. You look at partners, and you look at foundations. So, and you look at, okay, well, what who are they also working with, or who is also funding their work? Yeah, and you try and look who else they may also be able to help you identify other donors, particularly donors themselves, like donors you currently have. I mean, they're funding you. They're also interested maybe in looking at where else to look at. Sorry, for finding funding from other sources. And sometimes they're very happy to help you with that. You can also look around at who's around you, look at competitors, and look at peers. Also, what can be quite useful to do is to look at, so who's working in this sector that we're working in another geographic location. And then, okay, who are their funders? Because sometimes funders, they're interested in working in a topic or in a sector, and if they're not present in a certain country, then they might be still interested in working there. So for example, they've got, I don't know, there's a foundation that's working on education in Tunisia, and their mission is to support education in North Africa, and they're not working in Libya, then, and your organization is working in Libya, then, I mean, it looks like there's a good opportunity to reach out, because they may actually want to expand their geographical scope. And they're working on this, and that could be interesting. And you can look at some common portals and databases, and you can use internet research to find stuff. So common databases include DevX, Fund for NGOs, etc., etc., etc. In the chat, Iyad has mentioned Charity Commission in the UK. True. And the 990 database for US organizations. And we had a question: what's the difference between donor mapping and a CRM? Good question. Well, as I said before, donor mapping, there's different definitions here. More on the basis of donor mapping is around, in the end, the product you get from it is like a prospect table. CRM is customer or client relationship management. Yeah, I mean, you can use, for example, you can use CRM software to really assist you with managing your relationships with donors. You don't need to have a CRM system to do that. Yeah, I hope that helps with your question, Anna. So yes, and a good way to kickstart donor research, which also known as prospecting, is to do a stakeholder mapping exercise in your own organization. So you could get people together and ask them to brainstorm opportunities. And here's the example I just mentioned, that donors are generally interested in change in their focused areas. And so it can be worth, sometimes it is worth trying to explore with donors, like being open for exploration with donors. They're interested in making change in their areas of focus. So if the area of focus overlaps with what you're doing, even if it's not maybe in the same geographical focus, even if maybe you think they're a bit far away from what you do, it might be worth looking at together. Thank you, Abdul Karim, for your comment. Yes, you will be getting this presentation. I am not exactly sure when, but you will get it in the coming days. So now, looking at prioritization. Have a think, write in the chat, but don't send us yet. Same game. What criteria would you use to prioritize opportunities or donors? So have a think, write in the chat, but don't press send just yet. What criteria would you use, or what criteria do you use? Give everyone just a moment, or give a minute to think and to write. So please share. So, oh wow, nice. Hang on. Let me just read through some of these. I'm compiling in. Annual revenue, funding threshold, thematic theme, duration of funding, most useful for what we do, greatest amount, closeness between donors, objectives, and organization mission. Next call for proposals, earmarking, geographic interest, thematic alignment, amount of funds normally allocated for my needs, areas of work, thematic areas, aligning mission, alignment with our strategic objectives, type of funds, bigger income, more alignment, mission alignment, a lot of alignment, funding trends. And then there's you, and thank you for that. I hadn't noticed we had any raised hands, so thank you. Great. So yeah, there's quite a lot of different criteria you could use. Essentially, what you're really looking for is you're looking in terms of the perfect match. Is where you have high ratings in these three different factors. One, have they got what we want? Have they got the type of funding we want, the level of funding we want, in a time scale which fits what we need? Have they got what we want? Do we already have a relationship with them? Do they already know who we are? Yeah? Do they already not only know who they are, have they already funded us? Are they excited about our work? Do they like our work? Do they, yeah. If you've got really high, they score really high on they having what you want, and you already have a really high relationship, then already the work is half done. And the third factor is, are they interested in the same topics? And here particularly, you're looking at like the same change areas. Doesn't mean that you have to think, sometimes it's good to be open-minded in terms of finding the fit with donors. So sometimes you work on a particular topic and a donor will work not directly on that specific topic, but they work on something bigger, or they work on something slightly different, and then how you find the way to match the way together can be very powerful. And early on, people mentioned using what's important in donor mapping is looking at interest, and that can be a very powerful exercise to do, is to map what are your organization's potential interests towards a relationship with a donor, and what the donor's potential interests are in that relationship. And when I say interest, I specifically mean, what are their needs, what are the desires, what are the concerns, and what are the fears. And if you map those out, sometimes you can find that actually there's shared desires, or that you do something which could alleviate their fears or their concerns. Essentially, it's quite powerful. You could use it to help you in terms of how you engage with donors. And other possible criteria, this is also one of which people have mentioned is considering when's the deadline, like donor funding cycle, looking at what funding is available, and considering chances of success. Yep. So, action planning. We just had a question about prioritization criteria. So, do we set this criteria to evaluate results from donor mapping as a tool for prospecting, or do we decide this before doing donor mapping? I think it's good to think beforehand about what criteria you're going to use, because then that aids you actually in the donor mapping itself. Because if you know, I need to find information about, I don't know, like, yeah, this is I'm trying to think of an example. Well, yeah, if you need, you know that you have as a criteria, you need to know that they will pass your what's it called, like policy for which donors you work with. So, for example, you say you won't work with donors which have funding in tobacco, gambling, or alcohol, for example. Then you know that you need to find that information as part of your donor mapping. Otherwise, the result is not, the data you get may be not useful. You may also find that during donor mapping that you realize, oh, there was criteria which is useful, which we're missing, and then you could build those in. But I would say it's good to think about it before you do it. It's good practice to think about what you're really using it for, like I said, and who's using it at the very start to then dictate how you do everything. So if you are using it in order to to broaden your funding base, for example, so I then assume that would then mean engaging with new donors, then you want to be thinking about the next thing I'm going to talk about, action planning, before you start, because you want to think about, okay, who is actually available to do work on these things. Otherwise, you may end up prioritizing a donor where you don't have the resources actually to engage with them. So, action planning. If the donor mapping ends up in a drawer, it's probably not serving its purpose. So here I've given you an example. I have two examples of an action plan. And I have my family, I have two young daughters, we have guinea pigs. So I have used the example of actions related to guinea pigs. So the call for proposals contribute to the well-being of guinea pigs. It's been classified as a high-level priority. And so here are the next steps we could do. We can send clarifying questions, prepare high-level concepts, yada, 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 all the steps up to submitting an application. It's very clear who is going to do that, who's responsible. It's clear with the deadline. And there's notes, which help give more information about the actions or about what the people should do. So that's an example related to a call for proposals. Here's an example which is related more to engaging with the donor. So here we've got the foundation Guinea Pigs for Life. It's been classed as like a medium priority. So what are the next steps have been defined? Where you're going to send a letter of inquiry and invite them to a roundtable that you're going to be holding on the role of guinea pigs in community reconciliation. Sorry. I don't know why I put that, the role of guinea pigs in community reconciliation. And then later in the year that you've got your annual report coming out and you would like for this donor to know more about what you do. So Bernadette is going to be sending a copy of that. And who are you going to be sending it to? Marked here to help Bernadette. You want to send it to the CEO and the project manager. And then later in the year, you've got an event coming up related to a project, and you want to invite them to that. And Innocent will do that. And there is information there that they should probably call first, just to give the donor some background information on that event. So it's just an example of a way, actions that you could take in terms of donor engagement. And it's more demonstrating action planning table. So this is our little bonus from today. and then we'll go into questions. So from our experience of donor mapping, it's important to invest time and human resources. It's important to keep it simple and accessible. You want a practical tool that's easy to use and intuitive. You may want to share it with a larger group of people, a larger team, but only a few people actually to have direct admin access, able to change things on it. Look for quality control. It can be useful to have a folder of bookmarks, like a digital folder with bookmarks for regular opportunity websites and databases, for example, like the EU's funding portal or grants.gov, those sorts of things. You can it's good, useful to set up Google Alerts. They're free, and to sign up to newsletters for most relevant donors. Develop a process across the team to keep the donor mapping and the prospect sheet up to date. And it's useful to sign up to some subscriptions. And don't forget to make use of their free trial. So, what questions do you have? Now here, I'm going to try and open I don't know if there's a way for us to unmute everyone, because at the moment everyone is muted and I feel very alone. No way to.
I'm not seeing anything currently in the Q&A in terms of questions. If you have submitted something to the Q&A, could you let us know?
There's a question in the chat, which I'll get to in a second. I just want to see, I don't know if there's a way to allow everyone to talk at the same time. It's annoying. Okay, Nicole Stump, hello. So your question is, we've experienced a situation where some of our important funders are redefining, hi Nicole, are redefining their priorities or areas of interest, and therefore are not funding us anymore. Finding new donors is complicated. Do you have any suggestions for that? I don't know. Let's open it up to the group. Take a moment to think, and then everyone write. I'm also going to write. What could Nicole do? Okay. Everyone, please share your suggestions for Nicole. I'm going to now. I only have two. Sorry, so far. Diversity is the solution. That's quite. I like that's quite a catchphrase. If you've got a good relationship with these donors, you could always ask them for recommendations, introductions. Alternatively, see if your board members, trustees have contacts. Is the way to provide them with something aligning with their new priorities, as well as pushing forward the projects they fund to use. That's a compromise. Yeah, you can like try and find ways to repackage your projects. I mean, Yeah. So just so there was. I hope that helps you, Nicole. And then there's 2 questions about separate websites for list of development projects. And do you have a sample of the Dode database? Well, the examples that I presented here, we will share. You'll see them in the presentation. We don't have a separate sample to share with you. And the question on, is there a separate website? I mean, the websites that are listed in the presentation, for example, DevX and Fund for NGOs, these sorts of things, they are for, they're funding for NGOs, like for development work. And we have another question came in on the Q&A from David Massico. What are some of the approaches you suggest could be used to reach out to donors after mapping? I would love, okay. David, I am going to try and unmute. David, could you ask the question live? Could you give us a bit more what you're looking to get to?
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. David from Uganda, Kampala. I've done a bit of fundraising, and I've also actually supported, I'm a consultant, so I've supported organizations to do mapping. But one of the questions that comes to mind is what next after mapping? Because they get to a point where they fail to approach donors because they do not have probably an approach strategy, because it's on a paper or it's on a tool. But going down to reach out to the actual donors becomes a challenge. So that's what I was asking. What next after that? So it could be a very wide question, especially when you're talking about, I mean, the topic could be wide, but is there any way experience you have out there that could suggest some approaches?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, and thank you for talking. It's yeah, I mean, I think it really does. Sometimes it's dependent on the donor. It's dependent on your relationship with them, that then may dictate how you then approach them. So in some cases, it may be you want to take an approach of, so if there's a donor, for example, you don't know at all, you think there's maybe no relation to you as an organization, you may try and map, okay, where, or think about, or where are potentially common contacts. So I don't know, if both are active in a certain sector, you're both active in certain organizations or networks, that can be then a way to try and find a way in with those donors. Sometimes it is about picking up the phone and asking, and or emailing anyone you can at the organization to try and get a way in. And here I would stress, remember that you don't really know who the person is on the other side, so you should always be friendly and always be open to discussion, because you never know how that person may influence any future relationship. Also, what's also interesting here is, particularly with foundations, often the person who you speak to, like once you've got through to like a person who's in your area of work, like on your country or on your sector, often those are the same people who either actually have the power to make decisions on funding to you, or they're very highly influential on that. And so it's good to keep that in mind, and to really try and think about, well, what is it in their position? What's difficult for them? Yes, and here we had a question. I think in the Q&A, I think it was a comment. I'll just put it across. Where donor engagement should be an ongoing process and not an event. So when submitting reports, one can engage with technical person at donor level. That's really right. You can also an approach for. Thank you to this, Victoria. When you're thinking about reaching out to donors after mapping, you can think about what potential contact events may we have in the future. So for example, if there's a donor conference coming up, or if we've donor you already have, then or even a past donor, you could think about, okay, it's been 1 year since our project ended. Okay, that's an opportunity to reconnect. So we've got there's 4 more minutes left of the webinar. So now is your opportunity to put any questions you may have. And actually, I have to stop a little bit before, because I need to explain to you about the future webinar. So I'll be silent for a moment and let you post any questions you may have.
So we have a question on mapping not only common interests, but also common fears.
Oh, yes. Yes. So thank you for the question. I'm trying to think how, because so some people consider that interest can be like separated or categorized into four different parts. You have the needs, like what does someone actually need to have or need to do. You have desires, so what they would like to have or would like to do. Then you have concerns, those things that it's a bit worrying for people. And then you have fears, things that they are scared about. They're scared about. And when you're looking to establish relationships, it can be useful to imagine or to try and map what are the interests of the different parties that would be involved in the relationship. For example, your organization and a donor, what are their interests in the common collaboration? And here, for example, so I have a very common example. Once I worked with an organization in a sub-Saharan, they work in a sub-Saharan country, and they were approaching a European government. And the government was worried. This is working on a topic, quite a complex, it's in peace building area. So it's seen as complex, seen as it's non-linear. And the donor was worried that nothing's going to be scalable. We're not going to get any results in the time frame, because we're talking about long-term change, but the funding is only 3 years, and the ministry, like the people back in the capital, they need to show results, because in the end they're accountable to Parliament, and if there's no results, then they don't get more funding and all this. So like the donor had this fear that working on this area is not going to give us demonstrable results. Now, the organization I was with at the time, they identified there was this fear, and so they then, in their engagement with the donor, they showed them methodologies of how they would how in the past they have done evaluations and monitoring evaluation of their projects, and examples of results that have already come about, and they talked about, or they presented to them how in their future programming, where they wanted to work with this donor, how it could what results could come and how they may look. And this then really, they recognized this fear, they talked about the donor with it, they faced up to it, and then it really reassured the donor. So there's an example of how mapping interest and looking at the fears can then you can make for a more powerful collaboration. So we had a question about the webinar online, and I can't remember when. Yes, I think we could add you to the mailing list. Thank you very much, Nicole. We had another question. This I'll take. Sorry, I have to, because I have to end. But I'll take this as the final question. How does geopolitics affect donor funding and therefore donor mapping? That is a great question, a large question. I mean, as you can see, geopolitics does affect donor funding. There's great examples in terms of, well, recent events. You've got like the UK changing their policy away from, what was the commitment, 7% of GDP for overseas aid, and so that's had a massive change. Or even the amalgamation, the putting together of DFID and the Foreign Office together has been a massive change. Ukraine, the Russian war in Ukraine, a lot of funding has been made available for that region, and it's still to be seen how that they may affect global funding trends. And you've got many things. Another example is the relationship between like terrorist legislation and how then that's applied in governments and all this. Which can affect donor funding and through donor mapping. I mean, you can try and think of what could be relevant with donor mapping is looking at trends. So looking at what geopolitical trends may affect how, like our current donors, our future donors. I hope that answers your question. So please stay in touch. Like here, you can see both mine and Ewan's email address, and there's our website. Upcoming webinars. We have these webinars and next one's coming up. There'll be more after that. So on the 5th of October, in 2 weeks' time, with non-profit financial planning in certain times. And then the 12th of October, there's how to turn around a financially distressed NGO. And the third one, which is upcoming, is 10 tips to improve your proposal budget. So thank you everyone for being here. I had a good time. And I wish you a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for being here.